what's going on, Rod? Kahnawà. It's good to be back here. Ratsénhaienhs Ross Montour here. It's been a while since I've been on Chiefs Uncut, so I think I want to touch on a couple of things at any rate that have been involving my time over the last actually couple of months, starting with my involvement with external government relations. I'm on that portfolio, but I'm also the lead for the Kahnawake-Canada relations table, as well as part of the Seigneury of Sault St-Louis negotiations team. And this has probably come up before in Chief DeLille's, Mike DeLille's updates. But going back to last year when we first met with the new CERNAC minister, Mark Miller, we outlined some of the problems and challenges we had with the previous minister and people that Ottawa was sending to us to discuss both Seigneury and KCR, the Kahnawake-Canada relations, in terms of negotiations, protocols, and the ground rules for how we were having discussions. So we had issues with putting forward what our view was in terms of the relationship moving forward and how what would be the parameters of our discussion with the federal government. And we felt that every time we sent them a draft protocol for negotiations, discussions, it would come back to us altered and fitting more what the federal parties wanted to project. As a result of that, we said to Minister Miller, look, when we're talking about KCR, there's a lot of talk about, these days about what are the rights and recognition tables, I think they're referred to, which are, sort of governance weighted in terms of CERNAC, and some people referred to as termination tables. And so when we met with Mark Miller, and the federal team, as it were, which included one of the former key people, Joe Wild, we said, look, we're not here to sit. We're not sitting at any termination tables. In fact, we had told the previous minister, Carolyn Bennett, that we had no intention here. We're not here talking about, delegated authorities or, some version of the federal formula for what self-government looks like. We're involved in the activity and have been for quite some time of self-determination. And that was going to be the ground rules moving forward. At the time, we mentioned to Minister Miller that we had not been happy with the way things had been moving prior. So we requested that there needed to be a special ministerial representative that would be able to, say, lay the groundwork for what would come in terms of those relations, in terms of the Seigneury negotiations, in terms of the KCR tables. And that the way we said it to him at that time is, we are looking at the way forward out of the Indian Act, which is based on what our goals are as an Oklahoma community, as a Kahnawake community, which is based on self-determination. And that's already something that's been practiced, and what we need to sit down and discuss is the way to remove what I call encumbrances or barriers to a full exercise of self-determination. And here, when we talk about that, when I talk about it, we're not talking about whether that's the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake or quote-unquote band council. I'm talking about the Mohawks of Kahnawake and how we as a community, we as a people, will move into the future, continuing our own history of self-determination, which at one point is based on alliance. So that's the kind of a relationship we're talking about, government to government, with the federal government of Canada. We have our challenges with the province, of course. So for over the last number of months, we have been meeting with the special ministerial representative. Her name is Deborah Corber, and she was among a short list of people that we put forward to the minister in terms of being somebody we felt we could work with. And Deborah Korber had been employed here at the Mohawk Council going back to at the foundational period of MCK Legal. She worked under Mr. Murray Marshall. So she has familiarity with the community. She also had familiarity with the seigneury, and one of her first visits here, we took her on a tour of the seigneury, and one of the things she said was that so not much has changed in 20 plus years. But what I said to her at the time was, well, except for the explosion of third-party interests within the seigneury, all kinds of construction, all kinds of plans by the MRC, for expansion, highway projects, hopes for the extension and expansion of the light rail, electric rail, known as the REM, that you see sprawled all across the island of Montreal. Right now it's over in Longueuil. And we know that the plan is to come all the way down, and we said to them, some months ago, but not through the seigneury. So those are the kinds of things that we've talked to her about. So we've talked to her about membership, the importance of membership, and in conjunction with the United Nations Declaration. Now, for me, having been involved with trying to go through, before Bill C-15 was passed, trying to introduce amendments to which would significantly improve and the act if they had adopted those amendments, one of which was the in-law repudiation of the doctrine of discovery. The federal government and other people felt that it wasn't necessary, that it could fit into the preamble of the act, and could be used by the courts to interpret law. The problem with that is that it remains in the common law, and as such, then it's through Section 35. Section 35 is the so-called inherent rights clause. Now, what it means is, without the in-law repudiation of the doctrine of discovery, there are certain tests that if you want to express that you have and get recognition for an inherent right, that you have to demonstrate that your people have been doing it in pretty much the same way that your ancestors were doing it. And this is the language of the government. When we asserted sovereignty over you. And so this is unacceptable because as I see it, when I look at the people across the table, I don't see them with buckles on their shoes, big buckles on their shoes, pantaloons, and wearing tricorn hats, and they didn't come to a meeting on a wooden ship. Now, I'm using a little bit of humor there, but that is essentially what they're saying, is that you have as Indigenous people, are not entitled to sort of evolve in your practices, and so those are the kinds of discussions that need to happen, because it really curtails our ability to move forward. I want to touch on just a little bit in terms of the other areas. We've discussed lands, and lands is tied to membership. Right now with lands under the department, and this is now Indigenous Services Canada, that other department, which is about services and so on, and changes they've made to say the Indian registration at the federal level to redress inconsistencies and wrongs of the past, quote unquote. So that any number of people will be added to the federal list who really have, say, if you're looking at Kahnawà's perspective, no connection to Kahnawà. Maybe going back to 1876, they might have had an ancestor. And that's unacceptable for us. And it also is a contradiction. If the federal government is talking about adopting fully the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and then disrespects the articles which deal with our right to determine our own citizenship, who is one of us, and in place of them tinkering with the Indian registries at the federal level, that's a problem. And so we have challenges there. And the last thing, I want to just use this to lead into a meeting I'm attending this week, which is sponsored by the Assembly of First Nations. And I just want to say, preambular to that, is that we officially take a position is that we involve ourselves at the Assembly of First Nations in basically in an observation point of view, because as people understand, we speak for ourselves as Iroquois people. So to say that there's a national body that's going to sit down and negotiate things with the government, which we have no particular say in, and I think there's an argument to be made with respect to that. It could be improved, but it does exist that way. So Friday, I'm taking part in a virtual meeting, which is looking at certain mechanisms. There's a permanent bilateral mechanism that was signed by former National Chief Perry Bellegarde, dating back to the time of Justin Trudeau's first election. And there's a suite of legislation that was passed there, one of which was Bill C-15. But on the issue of rights and so on, they passed C-15, the UNDRIP bill, but in so doing have overstepped on a number of areas in terms of articles within the United Nations Declaration which speak to our rights as Indigenous peoples. And that is a right to economy, it's a right to land, it's a right to the determination of our institutions, our laws, and so on. So that needs to happen. We're having a discussion about that. There will be a discussion about this permanent bilateral mechanism, which needs to be amended. There will be amendments that they're proposed to be put forward by the Assembly of First Nations. But this meeting is preamble. There's no decisions being made. Basically attending, along with other people from Council, on an observational basis. A lot of the positions that have been taken have actually been positions we put forward pre-legislation, which unfortunately we feel were ignored in terms of potential amendments to strengthen that bill. April 3rd to 6th, I will be attending the Assembly of First Nations Chiefs Assembly and looking to say, okay, what is our input on that? So with that, I'm going to stop, and I'll just say Kahnawake for taking time out of your day to listen to my words. And I wish you well, and I wish continued health for all of our families, for your well-being, and look to see you again soon. Kahnawake.